Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Monique Freeman, and I'm going to be your guest speaker for today to talk about visual communications. So unfortunately, because of scheduling conflicts, I have a class while y'all are taking yours. So this is going to be a pre-recorded session. And also, as Dr. Zhang has probably told y'all, the reason why he wants me to speak on visual communications is because of my experience with graphic design. So I used to teach at the University of Tennessee when I was a grad student. So I used to teach graphic design courses, but also I've designed logos for Bobcast and Lion France, which was an information science, a pretty prominent information science conference, marketing materials, so slide decks, media kits, logos, brochures for Agency 865, which is a new media agency at the University of Tennessee, logos for nonprofit organizations in Clarksville, Tennessee, flyers, posters, various other materials for events, professional photography for family portraits, a women's conference. And also I was a layout designer for The Amplifier, which was Knoxville's homeless / social justice newspaper. Also a layout designer for Inspire magazine. It was an international magazine where they mostly focused on music and culture. And then also I have experience in HTML and CSS, so hypertext markup language, and then CSS cascading style sheet, and then CMS, which is content management system. So you got WordPress, you got Squarespace, you got Drupal. And so that's just a little bit of what I do. And also I do have my own personal website. It's currently being updated right now. But right now I am an assistant professor at Austin Peay State University in the Department of Communication. And I do talk a lot about visual communications and design, advertising, and branding in my classes as well. So for this session today, we are going to have an introduction, and then we're going to talk about colors, typography, magazines, newspapers, then an activity for the next session, and then I will come back on December 2nd for Q&A. Now, the reason why I can't be here with y'all is because I have a scheduling conflict. So the main thing is I teach a class during your class. So I decided that we're just going to pre-record this. Y'all are going to watch it. Make sure you pay attention, write down questions, and then I will answer them December 2nd. And also for the activity, I will answer questions based on that. And y'all should have kind of like a lab type of lab on Thursday. You're going to use Canva, okay? So just make sure you pay attention to this session. Okay, now the question is, what is visual communications? So the purpose of visual communications is to convey messages, whether it's audio, video, photography, web design, so HTML, CSS, infographics, layout design, anything that has some type of visual element that doesn't require text is considered visual communication. I mean, even on the side, you can use typography as a form of visual communication. But the thing is, you have to have a proficiency in this. Now, it's not like being the jack of all trades. It's just, for example, if you need to know you have someone that wants to design a magazine layout or a book cover in InDesign, you know just enough where you know the functions of InDesign, but then you can also go online, look at some of the directions that they have, because they have a lot of what's kind of like DIY type of websites that where it teaches you how to, create an egg or to do a drop shadow or to do a cutout, something as simple as that. But if you know the functions of the software programs, it makes it easier to navigate. But also when it comes to this, you have to be multi-skilled in visual communications. It's just not, oh, I'm going to be a graphic designer. No, you need to know just enough in photography, HTML, CSS, coding, content management systems, videography to be a valuable asset and to be marketable too. And once again, CMS is content management systems as well. Now, what you need to know about visual communications is it is an extension of the text or the story that is being featured in a magazine or a newspaper, whether it's digital or online, but it's still, think of it as the arm, and then think of your text as maybe the body. Well, not the body. Think of the visual part as your arms or your legs, and think of the text as, I guess, the abdomen. Okay, I'm not an expert in anatomy. However, you can think of it that way, but it's needed, especially with current generations. As more generations are born, they're actually becoming more visual because of pretty much the internet, introduction excuse me, to the internet since the age of 2. So for example, you see children, babies younger than 2, they have an iPhone while they're, I don't know, in Walmart and their mom's shopping for whatever baby food, and they're playing on the phone as a form of distraction. But that is an example of exposing children to visual communications at a very young age. And it can be detrimental, but also it can be beneficial in terms of being able to process that visual component. But also visual communications is a process. So overarching communication is a process. You know, it's something, interaction between multiple people, 1 to 2 people, multiple people. That's what visual communications is. It's an interaction between you and what you are seeing. Even when you go online, for example, I'm going to show y'all what's called the white darkness. It's on the New Yorker's website, and it has a lot of interactive elements in order to keep the reader engaged in the story. Now, so we're just going to start with visual communications, how it started. It began pretty much when photography was becoming, first when it's becoming in the beginning stage and going to the entrepreneurial, then to mass media, then going to convergence on the internet. So it really started in the 1830s, and it started in 1830, especially in 1839 when the daguerreotype was invented. So it was this big chunky camera that was on wheels that you had to cart around to take pictures. Now the shutter speed of that camera was slow. Sometimes it take 20-30 minutes to take a picture. That's why you notice a lot of people in the 1800s, early 1900s, they weren't smiling, because I'm not sure who can keep a smile for 20 to 30 minutes straight. Honestly, it can be kind of creepy. It might be creepy. I don't know. It's up to you to decide. But the main part of these photos is it stated that, hey, it's actually a lasting impression. Now, it really started to catapult in terms of visual when Matthew Brady in the 1860s started to document the American Civil War. So right here to my right that my cursor is on, this is a daguerreotype. This now would be $345. So it's, compared to other like DSLR cameras, it's actually affordable. But this is an example of what Matthew and Brady, and yes, his name has 1 T, not 2 T's, but when he was chronicling the Civil War. So this was taken September 17th in 1862. And so imagine trying to cart that big camera around the battlefield. Not only that, but you got to deal with photographers, especially that do war. You got to deal with the emotional elements when engaging in this type of photography. But yes, this was a very prominent image, which provided a visual element about about Civil War casualties and what happens. And this was the Battle of Antietam. Now, another important thing about visual communications, you have what's called cut lines. They're also called captions. So they're explanatory and descriptive about the contents of the photo. Usually it's 1 to 2 sentences. Usually the second sentence is to provide a cut line, but kind of like a byline to say, hey, this is the person that took the photo. And usually it's a very simple sentence because you don't want to take too much from the photograph itself. But its main purpose is for identity or identification. Now, just here's some basic things about photos and visual communications. When you do a photo and you want to feature it in a magazine or newspaper, first thing you got to think about is rule of thirds. Then you got to think about, okay, so what type of shot do you want? A long range shot? So a long range shot is kind of like you take a picture of the Grand Canyon. Then mid-range shot is like you're trying to focus on, you see maybe a nest in the Grand Canyon on top of a cliff. You focus a little bit more and you still have the Grand Canyon in the back, but you still notice, okay, you're focusing more on the nest. And then a close-up shot is maybe you focus more on what's in the nest. So maybe a bird or an egg. And each one goes more into detail. But with any type of photo, this is visual communications, you need to have some type of expression or talk about relationships, action, drama, unusualness. Like there's this famous photo of a bear and a wolf together, and they're two predators. Usually in those situations, they're not supposed to be together. They're always fighting. But it was with National Geographic where they found that photo, and they were so peaceful. So that is considered unusual. And then you got to think about the line of sight. So this is an example of line of sight. You see my cursor over this wedding photo. And then let me get out a pointer so this makes it a little bit easier. So here we go. See my red laser pointer. Line of sight means when you are looking at a photo, who are you being directed to? And we see that we're being directed towards this woman right here who's getting married. And that is what's called a line of sight. But also notice that there is a rule of thirds. So what happens if you see this lighthouse photo? It's divided into nine sections. And the rule of thirds is that in every single square, there should be something going on. And this is what's happening here. Look at rule of thirds. There's always something going on. So that's just a brief example of photography with visual communications. You're supposed to tell a story, and you could say this is maybe in between a mid-range to a close-up shot. Okay, so there's details, you know it's a wedding, you know she's about to get married, you know she seems very emotional, and you notice that these look like they're flowers, so it gives you some detail. And then this one, this can go between a long range and a mid-range shot. You know we're by the ocean, you know it's a lighthouse, you know it's rocky cliff. So once again, details. And the question is, what are you trying to communicate in this shot? You're trying to communicate emotion. You're trying to communicate expression. Because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Actually, it should be more than 1,000 words, but y'all get that meaning. Okay, now let's talk about videos. So if you think about videography, A, you need patience, B, you need practice, because the software, for example, Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro can be difficult to handle at first, but after a while, it gets pretty easy to do. Even if you stay away from it for like a year or two, you come back and it's pretty much like riding a bike. But when you do events for photography or videography, make sure you come at least 30 minutes early and scope out the place. Look at what types of shots that you can possibly do. Try to ask people if they want to do interviews after the event. But also you want to get lots of B-roll footage. So it's not just footage of people talking in the camera. It's footage of maybe someone giving a presentation and you want to record it, or you want to record people's actions, or you want to record people engaging in networking around the room. So it's kind of background sound, or you want to record people walking. So you want to record their feet. So that is B-roll footage. It's just extra. But things, for example, instead of zooming in on a subject, stop recording, adjust your camera because it might get a little shaky when you zoom in too. And just move around with a variety of shots. Make it interesting. So basic tools, laptop, notebook, to take notes, to look at timestamps, also to get names of people that you're taking photographs of, camera with video and photo capabilities, an audio recorder just in case, SD card, always have at least 2 of them, 32 gigabytes minimum. Then make sure you have extra batteries, and then have a tripod, which has 3 legs, or you can have a monopod, which I find easier to maneuver, and it's also easier to hold up to get part of a crowd. And excuse the background noise, I have an office right next to me. But then the main thing is that you need is to understand the software. So first, the basic tools, you have Adobe CC Creative Cloud. So here are the main things. A, Photoshop, which is for photography, Illustrator, which is pretty much for art graphics, vector images, And then you have InDesign, which is for print materials, Premiere Pro, which is video, Dreamweaver, HTML, CSS, Lightroom for video, After Effects for video, Anime for animation, Animate for animation, and then Bridge is pretty much like an organization system that you can use. And then Acrobat Pro, that's for PDFs. So for student teachers, it's $19.99 if you use your student account. Now, if you can't afford this, you also have some alternatives for this. So for Photoshop, a lot of people use GIMP, but also Photopea is actually pretty good to use. I haven't used anything for After Effects, but I'm sure that they're pretty good. Now InDesign, you got Canva, which I've used. It's pretty good to use, easy to navigate. And then Illustrator, Inkscape, and Krita, I heard those are pretty good. And you have for audio, you have Audacity, GarageBand, and then Dreamweaver. Now, what you could now, the thing with Dreamweaver is one side it has the actual what the website's supposed to look like, and the other side it's supposed to have the HTML and CSS. But you can download free open source software for coding. You have Notepad++ for PCs, and you have various editors for MacBook Pro as well. And let me just look at this really quick for coding. It is one thing that I know I use a lot. I will send y'all a link about what types of coding you can use for MacBooks as well. But also remember that when it comes to visual communications, it's more than just images, it's colors. It really is big about colors. Now, think about this. What is your favorite color? What's your least favorite color? What does your favorite color communicate to you? Okay, so with me, I like black. It represents a culture, but then also black is a very elegant color. It pretty much goes with anything, and it has it's really classy too. But think about, how does that color make you feel? What makes that color unique compared to others? What word would you associate with that color? So for example, if you think of the color red, it's associated with maybe warning signs, or it's associated with maybe what's considered sexy. Now, yellow can be caution, white can be purity, but also white can represent death. And for example, East Asian cultures, Middle Eastern, Arabic cultures, African cultures. Now, why is understanding the meaning of those colors important? And think of cultural contexts, and then how are colors used in everyday life, okay? But mostly, how are colors used to communicate a message? So I'm just gonna breeze through this because this is about color wheel. So this goes into what's called color theory. And it's mostly taught in graphic design, in graphic design in the art department, but I teach it a little bit in the communication department. So first you have the color wheel. So color wheel is made of hues, which is a generic name for a color. And there's 12 colors on this color wheel. They're all categorized by color harmony. So what is aesthetically pleasing, okay? And then first you got the primary colors. So red, yellow, blue. Then you got secondary, green, orange, purple. Then you have tertiary, so red, orange, yellow, orange, blue, green, and so on. But it's not limited to only those colors on the wheel. You can manipulate them, okay? So you also have color combinations. So you have complementary, so colors that are opposite on the wheel. Then you have analogous, which is colors next to each other or adjacent. So for example, think of monochromatic, so tints and shades. Then you have triadic, so evenly spaced out around the wheel, blue, yellow, red, primary, okay? But then you have green, purple, orange. Then you have split complementary, so it includes one complementary color and then two adjacent colors. So instead of red and green, it'd be red, blue, green, yellow, green. Then they have tetradic colors, so it includes two pairs of complementary colors. So you have purple, yellow, blue, orange. Then you have squares, so 4 colors spaced out evenly around the circle. Then you have what's called spectrums, or it's a band of colors. So on the red spectrum, which is also warm, you have red, red, orange, yellow, orange, purple, red, you have orange green, all these combinations, right? Lots of reds, yellows, and oranges. But then the blue spectrum on top, they're also called cool colors or colder colors. Lots of greens, blues, and violets. And then you have tone or value. So when colors are arranged from lightness to darkness, which means you add white or you add black. So if you add black, that's a shade. If you add white, that's a tint. So for tints, it's dark to light, okay? So you see the purple, it's going lighter. It's still vibrant though, or it's going, and also another example, going from red to pink because you're adding more white. So imagine if you're mixing acrylic paints together. If you add white, it makes the color lighter. Then you have shades, goes from light to dark. And that's just adding black to the color. Then you have saturation, which refers to, it's about the intensity of a color. So you can either do bright, it can be bright, or you can add gray to it. So it makes it more duller. And also with that, it's what's also called muted colors as well. Now, web versus print, you have CYMK. So that's cyan, magenta, yellow, and key means black. And this is mostly used for print. You put all three together and you get this black. So for example, when you go to a printer, if you print out a yearbook, it will print a double page spread in magenta, yellow, and blue. And then when you add it all together, you stack it on top, it equals black, but there's multiple different shades and tones and tints. Now, if you zoom in on that, then the closer you get, you'll start to see that the image is actually made up of little dots. Then you have RGB, so it's red, green, blue, and when you mix it together, it's white. So that's mostly for web. So these color modes of expression of numerical values, A gives you these colors right here. But then B, when you have those expression numerical values, you have them in numbers. So for example, in order to create the color green, you need 63% of cayenne, and then you need 0% of magenta, 96% of yellow, and then 0% of key. Then RGB, you need 105% for red, 190% for green, and then 40% blue. And then the hexadecimal, so those are numbers and usually a hashtag and 6 numbers or letters put together. And usually you can use those in web design as well. But the main purpose of these color modes is to be aware of what your audience sees and how they see it. So if you design something for print, you're going to use CYMK. But what happens if you want to convert that to online for RGB? The colors are going to be off, and vice versa. The color is going to be muted. So these numeric modes depend on the type of paper. A, you want to print on for CYMK, but B, also the type of monitor or browser that you're using. And these can be converted as well. So it's actually very easy to do. Just make sure when you print out your work and see how it looks, try to see how it looks in PDF form before you print it. So always look at it in preview mode. But also remember, color is communication. So, and what I mean by this, color can represent emotion, sound, information, language. It can represent mourning, for example, black in the US, white in China, but then green, it can represent environmental awareness. But back in the day, it used to represent a warning for arsenic. Yellow can represent courage, or it can represent caution. So think about what your favorite color is. How does it make you feel? Is there any cultural significance? And also remember, interpretation of colors is always subjective. But when it comes to color, you got associations, so connections between colors and culture. So for example, red and blue can mean a political party, or red can mean love. But then connotations, there's a broader association. So green can mean envy, red can mean anger. And then you have denotations, so a literal meaning. So blue sky, green grass, red roses. So here's an example of culture in terms of color and in terms of organization. So you have red and blue for the Electoral College. Then you have yellow to represent memorial and represent courage. But then you have black to represent a cultural symbol, domestic and global cultural symbols, and Black Lives Matter. But then you have the rainbow which represents the LGBTQI plus community. But also these have deeper meanings. So when you see these flags, when you see these colors, it can represent anger, social justice, equality, progress, belongingness, regression. Then you have the Holy Festival in India on my left. Then you have the Color Run 5K in America on my right. So they represent color, bright, and they're bold, and they represent movement, and they represent sound, and they represent joy. But then you have pastels and muted colors. So various hues where you decrease the vibrancy. So, and also with muted colors, usually can represent class, environmentally conscious people, higher price points, display sophistication like Tiffany & Co. Or you can also use the food products for the design. So you have Talente ice cream, and they use the colors of the ice cream in order to be part of their packaging. You got Whole Foods as well, and then you have Clinique. All of these products can't be, actually, no, all of these products are expensive. I mean, you go into Whole Foods and there's like an orange for one orange for like $5. It's very expensive in there. But it's also related to luxury and environmental status and class as well. So you got to think about who buys these products, who can afford them, what stores do you see them selling. So for example, you see Talente cheese and not Talente cheese, but Talente ice cream in Publix, which is a step down from Whole Foods, still expensive, great customer service, but still it can be expensive. I'm not dogging Publix though. They have really good key lime pie. Now, when it comes to colors communication, you have Harry Beck, who was an engineer who created the London Underground map, which helps us navigate subways and paths when riding trains. Now, this became so popular, it was adopted in other cultures as well. So we have the train system in New York. So here's an example of the underground, but we have a train system in New York, and that's on the left. And in the middle, we have Tokyo subway system. It looks confusing, but it's actually very easy to navigate. And that's just from personal experience. Now, also, when you think about navigating airports, you may not understand the language that is on the airport signs, but you understand where your gate K69 is at, so, or K62. So you can follow that, you can follow the arrows. But it's really good for navigation. It's really good for categorization, so the periodic table. As also thinking about increasing atomic numbers, you change the number. I mean, you change the color. It's about order. Color is about order. It's about importance. Color can be a universal language. Red could represent a universal language of love, okay? But it also can determine that level of importance. But then you have issues of readability when it comes to communication. So in order to be readable, you gotta think about legibility. So like Harry Beck's design of a train system, there are edits before it is displayed. Now, in terms of these edits, so remember, this is Harry Beck. Now, he actually got rejected for his original design. So he submitted it again, and then it was approved. He got rejected in 1931, got approved in 1933. And when it was put on trial, and people loved it. So you have to go for many edits. Even some of the greats had to consistently edit their work. But not only worry about the colors, but they have to be easy to read. Hence why you need to think about lighting in natural areas, artificial lighting on your screens. Think about the print materials. So you got to think about selection of colors. You got to think about the backgrounds and textures that it's going to be featured on. You got to think about the size, the shape of the image, and the text. So when it comes to readability, you have red text over with a yellow background and then vice versa. Now, here's the problem. The reason why you should not do that is because you have to think about eye strain, which can cause headaches and vision problems. And then you also got to think about people who have visual problems. So those who are colorblind, red and green, no matter how you put it on top of each other, there's the issue of accessibility for those who are visually impaired too. And when you print this out on a black and white copy, it just blends in together. Even when you do muted colors, it's still hard to read. So when you think of contrast, you got to think of harmony. And then you also got to think about contrast is the difference between two or more elements of color. So you see this contrast, and it does seem a little bit more readable on the green screen, on the green background, but at the same time, it's still kind of iffy. So it's about balance. So here are some tips to remember for colors and visual communications. A, choose no more than 5 to 6 colors when you design, because you don't want to look like you just puked up a rainbow on your paper. Now, are rainbows okay to do? Yes, especially if you're talking about the LGBTQI plus community. And there are times where you can put a bunch of colors on print materials and looks nice, like Lisa Frank. But just preferably 5 to 6 colors, and make sure if they're all muted, you make them all muted. Now you can mix it up a bit. And then I also have a link here. If you click on it, it takes you to Design Seeds, which now it's just a blog and it's an archive. But the person in charge of Design Seeds, she would, excuse me for the background as well, my window's by a road, but someone would submit a photo and then she would make a color palette out of all those photos. And there were photos worldwide too. So what happens if she has samples here, and those are called swatches as well. Now, here's the thing, train your mind to be aware of very stubble changes. Even if it's just a % off, train your mind to view it, okay? And then also always experiment and practice the colors. Control or Command Z, depending on if you have a Mac or a PC, is your best friend. So it's okay to mess up. You got time. You can go back and fix it. Then be deliberate in your color selection, and then know your client and know your audience. So ask them what kind of colors do they want in their product, marketing materials, promotional materials, advertising, creating a logo, whatever they want. Ask them what they want, and then you give your professional advice. But also do your research as well. So go on and see what the company is, see what kind of colors they have, see if they already have a set of colors, then that kind of makes it easier for you to make their marketing and promotional materials as well. And then, okay, once you know all of this, then you can break all the rules except for the one about accessibility. Make sure you don't break that rule with the red and green. But other than that, you can break all the rules once you know it. Next, we're going to talk about typography. So briefly, it's just about the arrangement of letters, words, text for pretty much any content you have. It is an effective tool that you can use, but you're supposed to convey meaning for the entire passage and individual words, which goes into linguistic meaning. So this meaning refers to what message are you trying to tell everyone? So this goes into semantics, or the study of meaning, and applies to both images and language. And I'm going to show you all an example of that too. But typography, size, weight, typeface, font, placement, spacing as well. So here's an example of semantics, but also how you can use typography as an image. So this is a cup of coffee. It's pretty simple, and also the color itself. So if you go back to the meaning of colors, you have association, connotation, denotation. So this is a pretty good example of typography and how you can use it as an image. Now you have what's also called serif fonts, and there's sans serif fonts. So serif fonts are a decorative line or embellishment to create a character or individual letters. But it's about classism, history. It commands respect. So you have Bodoni, which is an Italian font, and it was created in the 1700s. And it was of its time, it was considered modern. okay, in the 1700s. And it was one of the earliest examples of a modern serif font. But there is strong history, and this is an example of a serif font. This is Garamond, but there's also Apple Garamond. So just think of these little red circles right here are just ticks. Then you have sans serif fonts. Those are more contemporary, they're fresh, they're clean, they're simple, they're bold. So they're without serif, so they don't have those ticks on the corners. So this one is Gil Sans. And the thing is, when it comes to typography, so typography appeared in the late 1700s, but now it's more web friendly. So serif fonts are better for print and for newspapers, but sans serif fonts are better for web-friendly sites because you got to think about eye strain as well. Sans serif became more popular in the 21st century, and now you see it more often. And then also it's good for headlines, headings, displays. You can have a lot of fun with both fonts. So now you have, well, with both serif and sans serif, now you have what's called font, which is one size, weight, width. And then you have typeface, so a set of visual attributes of a particular group of letters. Now it's based on, in terms of height, weight, and width is based on X height. So think of the lowercase x, and that's how all letters are determined in terms of what is their X height. You can't go above the X, you can't go below the X. It's not counted in that calculation of size. But here's an example of a font. Both of these, this and this is Apple Garamond. This is Apple Garamond regular, and then this is a typeface Apple Garamond bold. Then you got to think about kerning, so spacing between characters. Now you have really big issues with the W and the A. Any letter that has this diagonal, diagonal line, that can be iffy when trying to do spacing. But if you look here, you have 57, 43. It's gonna look even to the viewer's eye, but it's gonna probably have different numbers, different measurements between each one. Then you have leading, which is spacing between lines. So you want to make sure that your text isn't on top of each other where you can't read it. And then you have tracking, which is between all characters and words. It usually evenly spaces it out. Now, also when it comes to typography, you can mix and match too. So this is Century School Book in terms of the font, but then Century School Book regular and then Century School Book italics. So when it comes to italics, you got to think about when you use different typefaces, you got to think about emphasis and you got to think about hierarchies as well. So this is an example. And also if you think about the story behind it. So Blackish is about a man, an older Black man. His name is Dre, and he's raising his kids and family in a time where he looks around at his kids and feels like their idea of being Black from what he remembers growing up is different from what it is today. So it's kind of referred as Black-ish. So it talks about that generational difference as well. So it's the idea, this title is supposed to convey Blackness and how it's perceived and wrestling with what's the definition of Blackness. So here and then here. Then you got Modern Family. So it talks about the social institution of family. So if you think about mid-century modernism, it was about the nuclear family, a mom and a dad, and then two kids, usually a boy and a girl with a white picket fence, a nice house, nice car, living the American dream, right? But then also that's a binary way of thinking. Now you have families where you have same-sex marriages, you have those who engage in multiple marriages as well. So if you think about Modern Family, also those who have blended families. So you have to think about all this. That's why you have right here, you have Helvetica New, so NEUE 35 thin, and then you have D. Roman. So it's still, it represents new and tradition. So now we're moving to magazines. Excuse me, and how you can use magazines as visual communication. So first thing when you're designing for a magazine, read the story, understand the story, and try to figure out, okay, how can I use my design as an extension? And also what type of interactive elements that would help enhance the story. Then you got to think about the photographs and how they should be featured. Then you also got to think about, will it be featured, will it be for print or digital? So that's a big one too. So for magazines, here are some elements you need to include: the headline, the deck, which is a subheadline. Then you have the bylines of who wrote the article, who took the photos, and sometimes you have to do multiple bylines as well. Now, if a lot of people are doing different photos, instead of just having a photo byline, just have the captions with each photo. Then you got to think about body copy, page numbers, section dividers, drop cap, which, for example, you see a text, but then you see a word that is increased in size. That is an example. You see a letter that's increased in size. So you have a very big A, and then all the other lines are 12-point font. That's an example of drop cap. It lets the reader know exactly where do they need to start reading. You can also do that for first lines of paragraphs as well. Cut lines, captions, hyperlinks, then you have photo links. So when you're designing in InDesign, you got to make sure your photo that you placed in InDesign, the software, is linked, because if it's not, then you're going to have like a big gray square when you save it as a PDF. So after you complete your design, make sure that you look at it as a PDF, because it's pretty much the closest thing you're going to see to check readability before you print it, and also accessibility. And also you can use InDesign and you can use PDF to check to see if your document is accessible. And then also you got to think about fonts. You have to think about your color palette. You got to think about also, do you have a second person to look at your design? So here is an example of magazines and illustrations. So this right here was published December 7th, 2020. And so this was for the New Yorker, and this was an illustration by Adrian Tomine. So it calls Love Life During the Zoom Era. And if you look during Zoom, pretty much, it's kind of like a mullet, business in the front, party in the back. And it talks about the complications that we dealt with when dealing with dating life during the pandemic. You couldn't see people while you couldn't see people in person because you're being afraid to contact COVID. Now, some of the earliest forms of illustration was actually in Harper's new monthly magazine, which was now Harper's Bazaar. And then also for the New Yorker, one of the latest issues is for 9/11, and it's actually a very beautiful image. So let me exit out of here real quick. Then let me click here. So this is the new, most recent in September of the New Yorker. So it's really about two young teenagers, young adults who weren't born at the time of 9/11 or was too young to remember it, but they're still trying to remember what's going on with the world and how it changed, how we do even security. And then also, this is an example of some of the earliest demonstrations or illustrations in a magazine, which is now called Harper's Bazaar. And then let me go back to this presentation. It takes a while to do screen share, but it helps when you can look at your notes while you're talking. But it's about visual language, it's about print, and that goes into the idea of transformation. Now you have The White Darkness by David Gran. Now, if you click on this link, it takes you, and hopefully y'all will be able to see this. It talks about one man's, his last journey, and unfortunately he died during his trek across Antarctica. So this was in 2018. And look at this transition. So if you look, you can see the flag moving, you can see the wind going, and this is how visual communications is engaging in interest convergence. So, well, not interest convergence, but it's engaging in convergence. And that talks about how mediums are converting to the internet. So watch this. Keep on scrolling. You see how it does, how it transitions to a white background because it's about accessibility. So it's about Henry Worsley and his final journey across Antarctica, and it includes videos, well, not videos, but includes images of him, one of his last quotes, and also this is the last radio transmission or radio recording that he had when he was in the Antarctic. But keep on scrolling down. See, interactivity. Sometimes it doesn't involve you clicking on an image. Sometimes it's just images that move. So that could be a GIF or GIF, depending on what you prefer. And then here's some examples of visual communications. You have photo slides, or also called photo story. And then also look at this cursor right here. See it moving? So that's an example for interactivity, because now before there was maybe cursor here and then a cursor here and you had to click here or here. But what the New Yorker is kind of representing is that they're saying it doesn't matter where you click, you can still go back, or you can go down here, fourth, in the middle, in the middle. So that's it's a very nuanced feature that they have. But if you keep on scrolling, photos, text, more photos. So it takes that magazine element into digital design. Keep on scrolling and going and scrolling. And then it has this as well. Another image. See if you scroll up. It has a pathway that shows another expedition and what path they use. But this is a really good example of digital visual design. Like I said, I strongly encourage y'all y'all read it as well. Now you also have what's called the Polar Purge. Well, this is actually something that I taught my students about design. So you have the head, then you have the deck, the bylines, the copy, the drop cap is right here. Then you have, I was trying to show them how to do page numbers on the side and in the middle as well. And it's very stubble design because you don't want to take too much from this really great image of a polar bear. And then you have the caption here. And then for more designs and inspiration, you do have issue.com. If you click on it, thousands of magazines from all different areas where you can learn about design for inspiration and layout design. Now for newspapers, you also have designs as well. So I used to write and be a designer for the Amplifier for it's a homeless newspaper in Knoxville. And what happened is we did a complete redesign of this paper. So they needed to find a dominant color. So we use yellow, which is reflective of the logo itself, but then also we needed to have a set amount of fonts, and then what type of typefaces they needed. How were we going to do the layout and make sure that can convert for all layouts in the future. And then also you got pull-out quotes, and I can send you a PDF for this for y'all to look at too. But it took about 2 weeks to do the redesign. And for example, this talks about rules of an emergency shelter. And this discusses how CARM in Knoxville, Tennessee had a monopoly on homeless populations and who they admitted. So the main part is this is a simple design which conveys that shelter, but a home, not just a home for food and basic physiological needs, but also just that feeling that you belong somewhere. And then on the back page, we included graphics about, okay, why exactly are people homeless? It's not because they can't afford it. It's actually because of mental health. And some people want to stay on the streets, believe it or not. But yes. So the next session is, and I'm going to stop here, where we are going to talk about Canva. And Dr. Zhang is going to play that presentation for you, and I'm going to show y'all how to use that website. And then that will be part of your activity, but also part of your lab. And then also it's going to count as attendance, so you kind of have to do it, but it's going to be fun. So thank y'all for being a great audience, and I will see you again in the next session. And then I will see you again on December 2nd. Y'all have a good day.